All right, well, good morning or good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, whatever the current time is for you. Thanks a lot, Chris. Yeah, I'm going to be talking about ArcGIS Runtime in this section. So what I plan to cover is the following. So we'll just have a short introduction to the Runtime Architecture, where Runtime falls in the AppStudio Stack, and then a little bit more about QML Runtime specifically. Part two of this session is pretty much all hands-on code-alongs. So up to you whether or not you want to just sit back and watch, or if you want to try and code along as well. I do have all of the demos up in the shared folder. So if you'd like to, to download that information, all of the code that I'm going to be writing is actually already on the shared location. So if you just want to kind of sit back and watch and take it in and then review the code, that's totally up to you. But the capabilities that, first we'll talk a little bit about all of the capabilities that are, or at least a good number of capabilities that are available with Runtime. We'll do a hands-on demo with creating or consuming a web map in our app. We'll look at how we can identify features in the map. We'll take a look at making edits. Then we'll switch gears and do a second app that will start with a graphics overlay, and then we'll add routing to that. And then finally, we'll just talk a little bit about offline. And then in the conclusion, we'll just kind of go over some key points and I'll take any questions. So for the introduction, so what you see here on the right is kind of the overall architecture of Runtime. So you have your platforms down there on the bottom, and then you've got your mapping and GIS services, and on top of that is the C++ Runtime core, and that core is compiled natively on each platform, which offers the best possible performance on all the platforms. And it fully utilizes the device hardware to ensure that you've got the highest performance for both map display and analytical calculations, all while running as efficiently as possible to kind of save your battery usage. And so Runtime isn't specific to AppStudio or QML. There are runtime APIs for many different platforms. But obviously, since we're talking a lot about AppStudio and QML in this session, we're going to be focusing specifically on the Qt QML API. So within the AppStudio stack, we have a few different elements, right? So, over there on the left, you see the Qt Quick framework, and that is what we talked a lot about on Tuesday. So those core QML components come from there, rectangles, buttons, text elements, drawers, item delegates, all the things that we looked at, the UI controls, the page, those are all part of Qt Quick. And then in the center here, what we're going to be discussing in this session is the ArcGIS Runtime API. And that gives us control to all things GIS, right? That's like what Chris said, putting a map in your app, and not just map, but it gives you access to be able to manipulate geometry. Find the intersection of a geometry, buffer a geometry. It also gives you access to Portal, as in like ArcGIS Online, and working with all the items, making updates. You can work with graphics. So maybe you want to display a graphic to show, routing, for example. So we're actually gonna do a sample of that. Geocoding is possible. Network analysis, meaning again routing, closest facility, and going offline, and so much more. And then what Erwin will talk about later in this workshop today is the third piece of the AppStudio stack, which is the app framework. And so I'll let him kind of go into more details, but this is really just kind of what the AppStudio team has developed, where they've kind of found gaps in the technology between what's missing in Qt Quick and what's also missing in Runtime and what was still needed, things like being able to do text to speech, for example, or give notifications. So those aren't things that really are available in either of the other two items. And so that the AppStudio team has actually developed those to kind of give a more complete feel for developing the apps. So I believe that we've already covered this, but when we're talking specifically about the Qt or QML runtime, if you think about if you had an Android, if you wanted your app to run on an Android device, traditionally you think that you need an Android developer who needs to use the API, the runtime API for Android, and a Windows developer, you need for a Windows device, you'd need a .NET developer, and for a Mac OS device, you'd need a Swift developer, and same with iOS. And for a Linux device, you'd need a C developer. But again, with AppStudio, you need one developer, one code base, and that app that's developed by one person can run on all of the devices. So that's really how QML stands out against the rest of the runtime APIs. Okay, so some capabilities. So again, this is just an overview of kind of some of the highlights, but what you can do with runtime extends way beyond what you see here on the slide. So just kind of call some of these out. Again, working with ArcGIS Online or portal items. We're going to do consuming web maps and identifying features and editing those features. Location display, being able to show your current location, being able to query features, performing geoprocessing operations in your app, utility networks such as a utility trace you can now do with AppStudio and the QML runtime API, geocoding, routing, you're working with scenes, so 3D, and then going offline, being able to make edits offline and sync those edits back when you're online. So just a few of the highlights here. So now I actually want to just get right into some code. So we're going to start with how you consume a web map in your app. And so the image I provided there over there on the screen is, we're kind of used to working with web maps in ArcGIS Online or Portal, but how do we then take those and consume those in our mobile apps? So the way that you do that is just using the web maps URL. And you can work with both secured web maps and obviously those that are publicly shared. With secured web maps, are those not shared with everyone, they do require a credential. And we have a sample in the AppStudio desktop under, when you click on new apps or new app and you go to the samples, there is a sample for portal user, and that will show you how to access web maps that require a credential. But for this example, I have one that's publicly shared. And so all we're going to do is create a simple app that just consumes the web map. So we'll start with our first hands-on exercise. I've got a web map of work orders. And so we'll consume that and also show our current location. So you can see here the blue dot. So that is the plan for this exercise. So if you are currently in the the shared folder, you'll find the code for all of the offline for all of the code alongs in the ArcGIS Runtime _ code alongs zip file. And once you have that downloaded, if you unzip that folder, what you'll find is a folder for each of the demos that we're going to go over today. And there's also a text file called demo _ URLs. And that just simply contains a couple of the URLs. So rather than manually typing those in, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy and paste the first URL into the chat for Zoom, in case you don't already have that information downloaded. So let me go ahead and do that, because we're going to be consuming a web map, and in order to do that, you need the web maps URL. So let me add this to the chat. Okay. So to start, I'm going to access my AppStudio desktop. So this is how I always start with creating a new app. I'm going to just click on the new app button. and I will just choose the most basic of templates for me. That's kind of the easy starting point. And I'm going to call this Web Maps and Features Demo. You can call it whatever you'd like, but we're gonna start with just consuming Web Map, and then we're gonna build on to this app. And also, I'll show you how to identify the features in the map, and then also finally edit this, edit the features in this app. So once you have that new app created and it's in your gallery, you can click on the Edit button, and that's going to open up Qt Creator. Okay, and so you guys saw how to kind of get started with developing apps on Tuesday when we were talking about QML. And we're actually going to do a few things that are pretty similar to what we talked about Tuesday, just to kind of get a header and a page and a somewhat nice looking framework for our app. But then for the most part, the rest of this is going to be all ArcGIS Runtime. So the first thing I'm going to do with this starter template is remove this text element, because I don't need that. So I'll just remove that. And just like we did on Tuesday, I'm going to start with defining a page. And we're going to fill that page to the parent. So we want this page to take up the entire width and height of our app. And also, like we did on Tuesday, we're going to give this page a header that will just be a toolbar. So this is going to look very familiar. We're going to give it a width of our parent width and a height of 56 pixels. And I'll give it a material background of orange. Now you'll notice that as soon as I type in material, it turns red, and it's got like a red underline. That's because I don't currently have the library imported. So that lets me know that I need to go ahead and import that library. So if you remember from Tuesday, the way that we did that was up at the top, we just import Qt Quick .controls.material, and we'll use the latest version, which is 2.3. Once I have it selected, I can just click the tab button to autocomplete. And now the red underline goes away, and I'm just going to set the color to material.orange. Okay, and then still inside of my toolbar, I'm going to just define a quick label so that my toolbar has a header. And the label will just say Web Maps and Features, and you can use whatever title you want, whatever makes sense to you. I'll give it a color of white so it kind of stands out against that orange background, and a font pixel size of 20. And finally, I want to center that label within my parent, which is the toolbar. So pretty simple. We've just got a page at this point with a toolbar as our header. And so I'm going to go ahead and play this just to see what we have, and there it is. So we've got an orange toolbar, Web Maps and Features. So pretty straightforward. Okay.
Can you tell me
yes.
the folder in the exercises that we're working?
Yes, sorry. So the one that we're currently working on is just Web Map Demo. So that's the one we're doing right now, but we're going to build on to this, and the next we'll be adding what's in the Identify Features demo, and then finally the Edit Features demo. So Edit Features demo will contain the all three of the exercises together, because we're just going to keep building on. So it's Web Map, then Identify Features, then Edit.
Brooke, there is a request to increase the font size if it's
Oh
possible.
yeah, I'm sorry. Forgot.
Thank you.
Sure. I think that's as high as I can go. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is outside of my header. So if I highlight the little curly bracket next to my toolbar, I can see where that toolbar ends. I want to go ahead and define a map view. And so a map view is how we are able to access maps in our AppStudio apps. And you'll notice, that nothing's happening. It's not changing colors. Well, again, it's because I'm missing a library. So the library that I need for this is the one that's already in this starter template. It's just commented out. And so I'm going to go ahead and uncomment out the runtime library. And when I do that, you'll see that the map view then kind of lights up with that purple color that we were expecting. I'm going to give this map view an ID because later on in our code, we will reference this. And we'll fill the map view to the parent, which in this case, because we're using a page, the page is smart enough to know that when I have something outside of a header or footer and I say to anchor it so that it fills the parent, it knows to put it within the header and the footer if there is one. Okay, and still within my map view, I'm going to now define a map. So when you define a map in a map view, you have a couple of different options. You can use a web map URL to just consume a web map, which is what we're going to do in this sample. And once we start working on our next sample for routing, instead of defining web map, we're just going to create our own map within the app. So you don't have to have a web map in order to create a map with AppStudio. You can create and hardcode your own map within your app. So we'll take a look at that a little later on. But again, for this demo, we're going to use a web map. And so we're going to use the web map that I provided the URL for in the chat. So I'm just going to copy and paste that URL into quotes under the property called init URL.
Brooke, I think
Yes.
the link needs to, you need to remove the org name. I think we sent it to everyone. So it needs to be like this. www.arcgis. So remove PS, DBS maps.
Okay, yeah, it works in mine. Like,
Oh, okay.
yeah, it should work. It's shared publicly.
Okay.
Okay, so if we run this like I just did, then you should see the web map consumed. I see somebody asked me to scroll up. Hopefully that's the right spot. Okay, so you can see pretty easy, pretty straightforward to just, consume a web map in your app, but we don't have a lot of functionality here, right? Like we might want to click on these features and kind of find out more about them. We can't do that. We can't edit. This is really just for viewing a web map. We do have the option to pan around, zoom in, zoom out, but that's really all we have. One thing I do want to add to this though is I want to show you guys how you can show your current location in a mobile app, because that's something that, when you're working with maps is really nice to have, is to provide the user the ability to see where they are on the map. So to do that, we are going to first import a new library that gives us access to the QML positioning component. So the library is called Qt Positioning, and we can use any of the versions here. I'll use the most recent. I think I have an older version in the sample, but that's okay. We can use the most recent. So I've got Qt Positioning 5.12. And now once we have this library imported, we can use it within our map view to show the user our current location. And how we do that is we use the location display property. And the location display has a property called position source. So we need to define a position source that this app can use in order to determine the user's current location. And so this is where we use the position source provided by QML that we just imported. Okay, and now that we have the position, there's one more thing that we need to do in order to actually see where our position is, and that is we need to start the location display. And we can do that within our map view or within our page. Really, we can say there's an option to write code for when our component has completed loading. So I'm going to define an area here called component.onCompleted. So once this page has loaded, we can specify some JavaScript code to show what we want to do. So once this page loads, I want to start the location display. So I'll call mapView.locationDisplay.start. And now, when we run our app, you'll see the web map. And depending on where you are in the world, I'm in San Diego, so I've got my map centered in San Diego, so it shows where I am. But if you zoom out, obviously you should see, and actually this will only work if you're on a computer that has location services enabled. So if you're on a desktop, I think most desktops don't have location services. So this, I'm working on a laptop that does have location services and the setting is enabled. So if you don't see this, you just would need to, test it on a mobile phone or tablet and turn on the location services, and you would see your blue dot. So I'll go back to the code one more time to show you what I did. So we've just got our page, defined a toolbar. Outside of the header, we have a map view. Set the location display. We have defined a map. We use the init URL property to just pass in the URL of the web map. And the last thing I did was I called the start method of the location display once our page is loaded. Okay. Any questions on that before I go to the next slide?